Good morning, students. I'm very happy to meet you. Today's class will continue. Volume 1, History Second Lesson. The World Between Two World Wars. In this lesson focused about the outbreak of the war and the aftermath of the war. So after the First World War, what are the things happened and how slowly the political, economic and other nationalist changes happens in India and foreign countries. Now we are going to continue about the world between two world wars. In its goes to First World War, we have to remember some dates. The First World War started in July 28, 1914 to November 11, 1918. Whereas this 1914 and 1918, it not only just a year, but it has a lot of historical significance. Germany was economically devastated after a draining defeat in World War I. Due to the Versailles Treaty, Germany was forced to pay incredibly sizable reparations to France and Great Britain. So after the World War I, during the Treaty of Versailles was signed in 1919, all the superpowers such as Britain, USA, other countries which is participated, they blamed Germany, telling that Germany is a root cause of the World War I. So obviously Germany has to pay a huge amount of debt, which means not a 1 or 2 years. It took many years or more than years. Still Germany was repaid and World War I debt. After World War I, Germany faced harsh conditions under the Treaty of Versailles. The treaty destroyed their economy with common unemployment and a massive increase in inflation. The treaty also made them admit to being responsible for the war. The people themselves were divided between East and West Berlin and Germany. Germany lost to the Allies in the World War I and suffered huge territorial losses, giving away its land and population to Poland, Russia, France, Belgium and Denmark, and ultimately had to sign the Treaty of Versailles. All overseas colonies were to be handed over the League. Developments in the post-World War I. Germany had surpassed even Britain and the USA in several fields of industrial production. As we saw in the earlier chapter, in this this was the root of the outbreak of the First World War. Then came the crushing defeat in the First World War, and German people were demoralized. The repressions and other classes in the Treaty of Versailles caused acute discontent and hardships, and it was utilized by reactionary forces to spread the idea that socialists and Jews had let down the nation and had even caused the Germany's defeat. Germany's defeat and humiliation at the end of World War I caused a deep shock to the German people. The Great Depression further deepened the frustration and prompted them to against the Republican government. Rise of Fascism and Nazism. The fascist movements shared common features: worshipping of the state, devotions to a strong leader like Mussolini and Hitler. It emphasized on aggressive naturalism and military conquest. It also asserted that stronger nations have right and need needed a duty to expand their territories by the wars. It stood for the state-controlled capitalism. It opposed socialism, communism, and democracy. And they believed that war to a nation, what maternity to women. So these are the strong feelings among the nations, German and Italy, as it fascism and Nazism. The fascist ideology, Benito Mussolini in Italy in 1922, Adolf Hitler in Germany 1933, General Franco in Spain 1939, Tojo in Japan. Germany followed the Nazism by Hitler, and Italy followed the fascism by Mussolini. These were the dangerous impacts followed by the said two countries in the world. The fascism was one ideology which developed in the period after the First World War, especially in the defeated countries. It is about fascism, Nazism by the Hitler. Hitler, he was a powerful speaker, and his passion and his words moved many people. He promised to build a strong nation and do the injustice of the Versailles Treaty and restore the dignity of the German people. Hitler opposed socialism, communism, and democracy. During election time, the Nazi party elected with 37% of votes in the year of 1932, and he came to power and immediately took steps to establish undemocratic and autocratic rule, and he stopped all democratic institutions like a parliament, and it included arbitrary arrest of political opponents. These were the arbitrary imposed to used in Germany, and continuous power, and those were used by the Hitler, which were not used in the world by any person. And after became the Chancellor of Germany on 3rd March 1933. The famous Enabling Act was passed and established by dictatorship in Germany. It gave Hitler all powers to sideline the parliament and ruled by his order. All political parties and trade unions were banned except for the Nazi party, and state established complete control over economy, media, and army and judiciary. Okay, next, Gestapo. What is Gestapo? It is a secret state police. It is a secret state police. It had authorities to stop and detain people, to torture and send them to concentration camps. It was introduced first in the world by the Hitler. Anti-colonial movement and decolonization process in Asia. What is anti-colonial movement? The colonial government which came to India in Asian countries, they controlled everywhere. It goes to decolonization. The colonist peoples of Southeast Asia were the first to demand the departure of the Europeans and to claim independence. Even France also had to cope with the demands for independence from its colonies. In 1946, it became embroiled in colonial war in Indochina. After 8 years later, the conflict ended with the victory of the Viet Minh over the French forces, which were to leave the country. Laos and Cambodia also gained independence. Next, Ho Chi Minh in 1890 and to 1969. He is a Vietnamese nationalist leader, and he was born on 19th May 1890 in Tonkin in central Vietnam. The Vietnam was then a French colony known as the French Indochina. In 1911, he took a job on a French ship and traveled widely. He lived in London and Paris, and was a founding member of the French Communist Party. In 1923, he visited Moscow for training at Comintern, an organization created by Lenin to promote worldwide revolution. He traveled to southern China to organize a revolutionary movement and Vietnamese exiles, and in 1930 founded the Indo-Chinese Communist Party, ICP. He spent the 1930s in the Soviet Union and China. At the end of the World War II, the Viet Minh announced Vietnamese independence. The French refused to relinquish their colony, and 1946 the war broke out after 8 years of war. The French were forced to agree to peace talks in Geneva. The country was split into a communist north and a non-communist south, north communist and non-communist south. And to become president of North Vietnam, he was determined to reunite Vietnam under a communist rule. India in the days of depression. The Great Depression in 1929, it had a very severe impact in India, and which was then under the rule of the British. During the period 1929 to 1937, the exports and imports were fell. International trade, the railways and the agriculture sector were the most affected, and the Great Depression had a terrible impact on Indian farmers, while there was a steady and increase in land rent. So the value of the agricultural produce had come down to alarming levels. Government of India Act 1935. The Government of India Act was passed by the British Parliament in 1935, and it came to end into effect in 1937. It was based on a report by a joint select committee. It is and conclude about especially in India. Anti-colonial movements in Africa. Now we are going to see about anti-colonial movement in Africa. So all the about Africa, the next thing which comes to mind is able to telling about apartheid, racial discrimination, finding colonies, finding colors, especially black and white discrimination. These are about Africa. Apart where the tourists came to Africa, and they were enjoyed in the coastal zones of Africa. But here what happened, it is until the 19th half of century, Africa was not discovered for its interior wealth and enough natural resources. They thought Africa has a dry land, but what happened, it is during the last half of 19th century, especially Europeans to settled there. The Berlin Colonial Conference, it was held in 1884 to 1885, especially paved way that even British, the German, one of the colonial powers, entered to this Africa, and they going to use it to purpose exploiting the native people of South Africa, the Boers. So against the resolution, now Boers war started. Who are the Boers? The descendants of original Dutch settlements who caused African as the language of so the language were used by the Africans, and they were called as Afrikaners or Boers. The colonies of Natal, and Cape colonies, this was controlled by the British. And another side of Boers, they had two places. One is Transvaal, and another one is the Orange Free State, had long been unfriendly. In 1886, it is sparked as that the Johannesburg in Africa, especially the area of Transvaal, they found that there are enough number of gold settlements, as well as they found that moved way, especially the British. The German and other colonies, the Transvaal areas, otherwise called as Gold Transvaal Zone, after the discovery of gold in 1886, the Transvaal city was the high of all colonial rule, because everyone came and they settled in near to Johannesburg for exploitation. The Boers considered if any other people who came and settled in Africa, and they were called as a foreigners or utiners. The Cape Colony and Natal Colony was controlled by the British. The Cape Colony and Natal Colony was controlled by the British. Now what's happening? They're all planned a Johannesburg gold mining, but obviously what happened? The British found that there is a gold. So they started some way to put all the mining persons inside, and a big settled as an exploited gold. So the Boers imposed weight taxes, obviously is put the way for another war with them, as a British. They are not a colonial power, but the Boers prepared themselves a war. The Boers beginning, they had a self-determination in 1899. In 1899 to 1902, the war was terrific. Initially, the Boers were successful. They were defeated British, but after 1902 the Boers had a very bad time. So the Boers followed the guerrilla fighting system. The British destroyed farms and crops of Boers, and they set up to imprison the women and the children. It had a shortage of food, basic medical facilities. There is no proper sanitary facilities, etc. So there are 26,000 people were died. Nationalist politics in South Africa. In South Africa, there were two main political parties. One is Unionist Party. This political party was fully supported and controlled by the British. And second one party is a South African party, where the South African party was supported by the Afrikaners, or otherwise called as Boers. The first South African party Prime Minister Louis Botha. The first South African party Prime Minister Louis Botha, but he would to cooperate to British. Once on see this cooperation, a militant group from a South African party, they came out and they formed a new party. It is called the National Party. They formed a new party. It is called the National Party, which was headed by the Hertzog. In this year 1920 elections, the General Hertzog got 44 seats, and the General Smuts leader of South African parties, he got only 41 seats. So he lost it. Then he had a merge with the Unionist party, and they formed a new government. The racist policy against blacks. The Afrikaners were harsher, and the racist policy towards the blacks and minority Indians. In 1923, an act was passed to contain in the natural residence to certain and parts of towns, and then in 1913 act was passed, and this act segregated black and white farmers from doing out to a farming together in same place. But this act proved that the white farmers can be inside the country, whereas the black farmers are thrown out of the country. They could not find even a small piece of land inside a country. And next, dominion status for USA. The South Africa had gained dominion status, and it had a full control over foreign policy during the time. The World Economic Depression brought unemployment, and the labor withdrew. It supported given the national party. In spite of this thing, the General Smuts, he expert his coalition government, which means a group of people joining together for the betterment of social causes for common purpose. And next, political development in South America. The Europeans discovered America, and there were peoples or tribes, are living with the civilizations. So here we can remember that we had three major civilizations. The one is Mayan or Mayapan civilization, and another one is Aztec civilization, and third one Inca civilizations. These civilizations were in that period located in that Mexico, especially Central America, Peru in South America. And now we start with the Mayan civilizations. Mayan goes for the language, and easily we can understand Mayan calendar. The Mayan civilizations were living places where they controlled the authority of people, as well as they established a strong army. Everything is fine until now. What's happening? Large cities were prevailing in this civilization, and now all these large cities were going to join together, and they going to formed into a new civilization. It is called as a center of Maya civilization of Native American, otherwise called American Indians, otherwise called as the 11th century. We can see League of Mayapan, and the civilization went for 100 years. This civilization was very famous. After the 100 year, the end of the 12th century, find out the Mayapan civilization they were destroyed. They were destroyed, and then next continued. Then Inca and Aztec civilizations were containing progress. Now at the end of the 12th century, what happened is the Aztec from Mexico, they came and captured the remains of the Mayapan civilization, and they found a new capital city, and they called a capital city of Tenochtitlan. So the capital city Tenochtitlan was found by Aztec for nearly 200 years. The Aztec ruled by the empire. As 200 years, Aztec ruled by the empire. The Aztecs were generally referred to a military nation, as well as they sought to control people and to last exploit them. And next, European colonization and its imperial impact in the 16th century, especially the Aztecs were at the height of their power, and during his time, Aztecs was ruled by the related adventures led by the Spain, and armed Hernan courts was taking care of Aztec civilization. But unfortunately, at the 16th century, the huge empire which was in peak, the Aztec civilization stumbled down, and whole civilization was collapsed. Aztec civilization were otherwise called Mexican civilization. Aztec civilization were otherwise called Mexican civilization. And at last, next person or other famous conqueror, Inca civilization. It is named Francisco Pizarro. Next, by the late 18th century, demand for political freedom, administrative, and then throughout Latin America. The impact of Napoleonic invasion of Spain, Portugal. The American and French Revolution inspired to the Latin Americans, especially during the period of Napoleon. In 1808 started to invade Spain and Portugal, and obviously this thing pertained the freedom movement, this spark of freedom movement in the zones, in the near zones of Latin America. So to the term, remember like this, when French was controlled to Vietnam during the period on 1775, the time India was also under the slavery, as like that these colonies, colonial power went into the other places is colonies. Monroe Doctrine. The James Monroe is one of the president of USA. The fight of independence intensified in many zones, especially in South America, and people started to war freedom. The time rulers, King of Spain, there were ruling in the period. So the European kings wanted to help the kings of Spain, and at last controlled the South American colonies. Next, as it is already planned, the Monroe president of the USA said that I will be proving the document where almost from Royal Charter rule, this rule taking care of America. So these rules said clearly that in any Europeans who interfere in the affairs of America, either north or south, it is considered as that waging war against USA. By 1830, the whole of South America was free from European domination or invasion or colonization, and this is how the US protected the South Americans, especially the Europe. Next, distinguished among Latin American nationalists, disunity among Latin American nationalists. The Latin America is not only with a small piece of land where it had a lot of island country, as well as it has lot of divisions in it. Latin America did have not war, only Spain and Portugal, but they had war among themselves. And next, the Great Depression in South America. Since America was a dominant power, and how we can see that all the middle class people, some other trying to settle, and during this time on October 24, 1929, the Great Depression is happening in the South America. which is going to a heavy downfall for them. And so Great Depression on the side. After this depression, the ruling classes, they came out. They cannot accommodate rising expectations of the several assertive group or several peoples who believe in the government, how they started to against to government. And during this, it kind of big protest in Mexico, where it had enough of people with the classification, especially the ruling class and the middle class intellectual against them. So here the ruling class means oligarchic groups. The peasant and everyone over against the ruling class regime. And native regime, the native people and powerful leaders, this thing made the ruling class peoples were weaker section, so they cannot control the people in all the zones. In this time, the people asked liberty. And then the people started to ask for the enough of electoral reform, where the people started to ask for the ballot box. So the president election came in 1932. The people selected by the new president, in his name F.T. Roosevelt. Commonly he was known as FTR, Franklin D. Roosevelt. So shortly known as FTR. And he was assured office on March 4, 1933. He followed the New Deal policy for the people. And the New Deal policy has become with reforms throughout the world. Okay students, the class is over. Thank you.